Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever been told in 1,000 quiet ways that you are not enough? This is the story of Ava, a woman her husband deemed unfit for the spotlight, a wife he considered little more than a decorative object in his perfect life. He thought he could control the narrative, even going so far as to physically erase her name from the most important night of his career. But he never once considered the woman she was when he wasn't looking. He never imagined that the person he was trying to hide was the one person they were all waiting for. Get ready, because this is the story of how one woman turned the tables in the most spectacular way imaginable. The penthouse on the 58th floor was less a home and more a gallery of Nathaniel Caldwell's success. It was a cold, minimalist space of polished concrete floors, glass walls overlooking the city, and furniture so artfully uncomfortable it dared you to relax. Every object had a purpose, a price tag, and a story that Nathaniel loved to tell. Ava Barrett, his wife of 6 years, felt like one of those objects. She was in her studio, a converted third bedroom, that was the only space in the apartment with any warmth or chaos. The scent of clay turpentine and damp plaster filled the air. Her hands, caked in dried grey earth, worked deftly on the armature of her latest piece, a large abstract figure of a bird, its wings half-formed, struggling to break free from a cage of twisted metal. It was, she often thought with a private, bitter irony, a self-portrait. The door slid open with a whisper, quiet hiss, a sound designed to be unobtrusive, but which always felt like an intrusion. Nathaniel stood there, immaculate, in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, his tie a slash of silver silk against a crisp white shirt. He held a tablet in one hand, his thumb scrolling endlessly. "Ava, darling," he said, his voice smooth and polished, the kind of voice that closed multi-million-dollar deals without ever rising above a conversational tone. He didn't step inside, merely leaned against the doorframe, his expensive leather shoes staying safely on the polished concrete. Still playing with your mud pies, Ava didn't look up. She pressed a fresh piece of clay onto the bird's wing, smoothing the seam with a practiced thumb. "It's a commission, Nate. For the new lobby of the Sterling Tower. Right? Wonderful." His tone was dismissive, the same one he used for discussing the weather or the caterer's canapes. "Listen, I need to talk to you about the Innovators Gala. It's next Friday." Her hands stilled. The gala. For the past 3 months, it was all he had talked about. It was hosted by the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, an institution Nate had been desperately trying to woo for a seat on their board. This year, his venture capital firm, Caldwell Capital, was a major sponsor. For Nate, this wasn't a party. It was a coronation. "I was thinking of wearing the blue gown," she said, finally turning to look at him. "The one we bought in Milan." Nathaniel's smile was thin, tight, and completely devoid of warmth. It didn't reach his cool grey eyes. He tapped his tablet. "About that. There's been a bit of a situation with the guest list, a bit of a mix-up." A cold knot began to form in Ava's stomach. She knew that tone. It was the prelude to a carefully constructed excuse, a verbal anesthetic before the knife went in. A mix-up. What kind of mix-up? "It's terribly political, darling. You know how these things are." He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her paint-splattered jeans and old t-shirt with faint distaste. "They've had to be incredibly strict with the +1s this year. We sponsored a platinum table, of course, but even then every seat has to be filled by someone strategic." Ava wiped her hands on a rag, the simple motion, feeling heavy, deliberate. "Strategic, Nate, I'm your wife. And I adore you for it," he said the words, automatic, meaningless. "But this isn't a social event. It's business. I have investors flying in potential partners. I have Bianca DeSantis from the European desk taking the seat next to mine. She's crucial to the new Zurich fund. Every single person at that table is a piece of a puzzle. It's just, there isn't a spot. The words hung in the air as cold and sharp as the glass walls around them. There isn't a spot. Not, I'm so sorry, or I fought for you. Just a simple, brutal statement of fact. You do not belong. You're telling me, Ava said, her voice dangerously quiet, that my own husband is going to the most important event of his year. An event I have listened to you plan for months, and you're not taking me. Don't be dramatic, Ava. He sighed, his patience already wearing thin. It's a boring, stuffy affair. You'd hate it, all that talk about portfolios and projections. You'd be bored out of your mind. Think of it as a gift, a free night to yourself. You can order in that Thai food I can't stand and watch one of your depressing foreign films. He thought he was being generous. He genuinely believed that he was sparing her. That was the most insulting part of it all. He had created such a small, fragile image of her in his mind, the delicate artist wife, overwhelmed by the real world of power and money, that he thought her exclusion was a kindness. I see, she said. The knot in her stomach tightened into a block of ice. She looked back at her sculpture at the bird fighting its way out of the metal cage. For the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in its clay eyes. Good. I knew you'd understand, Nate said, already turning away his attention back on his tablet. Bianca and I have a pre-gala strategy dinner, so I'll be out late most evenings next week. Don't wait up. The door slid shut, leaving Ava alone in the silence of her studio. The city lights began to glitter outside the window, a million tiny stars, in a world she was apparently not equipped to handle. He hadn't just uninvited her. He had deemed her unworthy. He had looked at the life he was building and decided there wasn't a space for her at the table. She picked up a sculpting tool, its wooden handle smooth and familiar in her palm. She gently ran the steel tip along the bird's wing, carving a fine, deep line that defined a feather. It was a line of separation, a line of decision. Nathaniel was right about one thing. It was going to be a very, very interesting night, but not for the reasons he thought. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in casual cruelty. Nathaniel treated the subject of Ava's exclusion as a settled matter, a minor logistical issue that had been resolved. He moved through their shared space with an air of buoyant self-importance, his conversations filled with names she didn't know and deals she was meant to find intimidating. He spoke of Bianca DeSantis with a reverence typically reserved for royalty or deities. Bianca managed to get a meeting with the Helsinki group he'd announced to the empty living room, knowing Ava was within earshot. Her insights into the Nordic tech scene are simply unparalleled. Or Bianca and I were at the Perennial until 2 a.m., hammering out the final details for the acquisition. The woman is a machine. Ava absorbed each comment like a tiny shard of glass. She knew what he was doing. He was building a wall between his world and hers, and Bianca was the architect. Bianca was strategic. Bianca was essential. Bianca was everything Ava, in his eyes, was not. The final unforgivable blow came on Wednesday, 2 days before the gala. Ava was walking past Nathaniel's home office when she heard him on a video call, his voice crisp and authoritative. "Peterson, yes." "Caldwell here," he said. "Just confirming the final seating arrangement for the Caldwell Capital table. I have the list right here." Curiosity, a morbid, self-destructive impulse, made Ava pause just out of sight. Peterson. That would be David Peterson, the executive director of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. "Yes, it's Caldwell. DeSantis, Thompson, Morrow. All confirmed," Nate continued. There was a pause. "Oh, one final detail. I see my wife Ava is still on the master list as my +1, a clerical error on our end. Please ensure she is removed, completely. My official guest for the evening is Ms. DeSantis. Ava's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a mix-up. It wasn't that there wasn't a spot. He had actively, deliberately taken her name and had it struck from the record. The lie was one thing. The cold, bureaucratic efficiency of her erasure was another entirely. She felt like she had been redacted from her own life. No need to send a revised confirmation, Nate was saying. Just make sure security has the updated list. We don't want any awkwardness at the door. Thank you, Peterson. I look forward to Friday. He ended the call. A moment later, Bianca DeSantis walked into the office holding 2 glasses of champagne. Ava hadn't even known she was in the apartment. Bianca's laughter, a silvery tinkling sound that grated on Ava's nerves, echoed down the hall. All sorted, Bianca asked. All sorted, Nate confirmed. The list is finalized. No distractions. Ava backed away from the door, her heart pounding, a dull, painful rhythm against her ribs. No distractions. That's what she was. A potential for awkwardness at the door. A distraction from the real business of his life. She retreated to her studio, the one place that was truly hers, and sank onto a stool. The rage came first, hot and blinding. She wanted to storm into that office, to shatter their champagne glasses, to scream at the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it all. But then something else settled over her, something colder and far more potent clarity. For years she had been shrinking herself to fit into the box Nathaniel had built for her. She had downplayed her successes, kept her business affairs private, and allowed him to believe she was just his artist wife. Why? To protect his ego. To maintain the fragile peace of their marriage, she had thought it was a compromise, but now she saw it for what it was. A slow, methodical surrender of her own identity. Her grandmother, Rosemary Barrett, had always told her, "Never let anyone else write your story, Ava. And for God's sake, never let a man hold the pen." Rosemary had been a formidable woman, a school teacher who had, after her husband's early death, taken his small hardware store and through sheer grit and intelligence turned it into a regional chain. She had left Ava a substantial inheritance, but the real gift was the wisdom she had imparted alongside it. "Money is a tool, my girl," she'd said. "It can build things or it can break things. But its best use is to buy you a seat at any table you damn well please." Ava looked at her phone. She scrolled to a contact saved under a simple, unassuming name. Finch. Mr. Finch was her wealth manager, a quiet, brilliant man who operated out of a discreet office in a part of the city Nathaniel would never deign to visit. They had spent the last 8 years since Rosemary's passing, turning her inheritance into a silent, formidable portfolio. She had invested under her maiden name, Barrett, in things Nathaniel had dismissed as frivolous sustainable technology, niche, art startups, female-led biotech firms, ventures he considered passion projects, not serious investments. He had no idea. He saw her as the woman who played with mud pies. He had no clue that the mud pies had bought the Sterling Tower, the very building commissioning her sculpture through a majority stake in the real estate investment trust that owned it. He had no clue about the Barrett Foundation, the charitable arm of her holdings she had established 2 years ago, which quietly funded arts and education programs for underprivileged communities. She had kept it all separate, a secret garden of her own success. She had told herself it was to avoid complicating their marriage, to keep something that was just for her. Now she knew the truth. She had hidden it because she was afraid of him, afraid of what his ego would do with her success. He would have either tried to control it, absorb it into his own brand, or he would have been so emasculated by it that he would have destroyed their relationship. There was no scenario where he could have simply been proud of her. Her finger hovered over the call button. She pressed it. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice steady, the cold clarity now hardening into steel. "It's Ava Barrett. I need to make a withdrawal from the Foundation's discretionary fund. A significant one. Yes, it's for a donation to the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. I know their Innovators Gala is on Friday. I believe they've had a last-minute withdrawal from their title sponsor. Yes, I'm quite sure. I want to cover the entire shortfall. Anonymously for now. Just list the donor as a friend of the arts. And one more thing. I'll need to speak with their director, David Peterson, personally. There are a few arrangements I'd like to make for the evening." As she ended the call, she looked over at the bird sculpture. Its wings were nearly complete. It was no longer struggling. It looked ready to fly. Ava's secret life operated with the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine. It had started 8 years ago in a stuffy lawyer's office, where a 24-year-old Ava, still grieving the loss of her grandmother, was handed a portfolio that made her head spin. Rosemary Barrett hadn't just left her a nest egg. She had left her a launch pad. The inheritance was a mix of real estate holding stocks and the cash from the sale of her hardware empire. It was a formidable sum enough to live comfortably forever. But Rosemary's final letter, enclosed with the documents, had a different instruction. "Don't just live on this, my girl," the letter read. "Build with it. Make it grow. Make it mean something." Finding Mr. Finch had been her first act of defiance against the life she was supposed to lead. She had just started dating Nathaniel, who had scoffed when she mentioned her inheritance. "Let my people handle it, darling," he'd said dismissively. "We'll fold it into my main fund. You won't have to worry your pretty little head about it." Even then, the condescension had grated. She knew instinctively that if she handed her grandmother's legacy over to him, it would be consumed, absorbed, and she would never see it again as her own. So she had sought out an independent advisor. Mr. Finch was the opposite of Nathaniel's slick, aggressive brokers. He was a small, meticulous man with thick glasses and a passion for deep-dive research into undervalued markets. He listened to her. When she said she wanted to invest in companies that were creating a better future, not just a bigger bottom line. He didn't laugh. He brought her prospectuses for solar panel startups, lab-grown textile companies, and educational software firms. Together they created Rosemary Holdings, an entity that existed only on paper and in the quiet, encrypted corners of the financial world. Ava, under her maiden name, was the sole director. It was her forge, the place where she hammered her grandmother's legacy into a future of her own making. While Nathaniel was chasing hostile takeovers and celebrating quarterly earnings, Ava was playing a longer game. She read financial reports with the same intensity she studied anatomical charts for her sculptures. She learned about seed rounds, market caps, and leveraged buyouts. She developed a keen eye for potential for the passionate founder, with a brilliant idea that the mainstream VCs like Nathaniel had overlooked. Her first major success was an investment in a small biotech firm working on a revolutionary water purification system. Nathaniel had laughed at the pitch deck she'd shown him, calling it tree-hugger nonsense. 18 months later, the company signed a massive contract with a drought-stricken nation, and the value of Ava's shares skyrocketed by 800%. She never mentioned it to him. The quiet satisfaction was more than enough. From there, Rosemary Holdings grew exponentially. She acquired commercial real estate in up-and-coming neighborhoods, became a silent partner in a dozen burgeoning tech companies, and built a stock portfolio that was both ethical and ruthlessly profitable. 2 years ago, she had formalized her philanthropic efforts by creating the Barrett Foundation. It was the soul of her enterprise, The foundation gave scholarships to art students, funded mobile libraries in low-income neighborhoods, and provided seed grants for community gardens. It operated with a strict anonymity clause. Ava didn't want praise or recognition. She wanted to see the impact, to know that the seeds her grandmother had planted were bearing fruit in the lives of others. Her phone call with Mr. Finch had set a series of discreet but powerful events into motion. Within an hour, a wire transfer for an astonishing sum left the Barrett Foundation's account and entered the coffers of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. It was more than enough to cover the shortfall left by the original title sponsor, a pharmaceutical giant that had pulled out due to a sudden PR crisis. The next call was to David Peterson, the foundation's director. She reached him on his private line, a number Mr. Finch had procured. "Mr. Peterson, my name is Ava Barrett." She began, her voice calm and measured. There was a confused pause on the other end. "I'm sorry. Is this regarding the Gala? I just spoke with Mr. Caldwell." "This is not regarding Mr. Caldwell," Ava said smoothly. "I am calling on behalf of the foundation that just covered your sponsorship gap. A friend of the arts. I believe it was listed as." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Ava could almost hear the gears turning in Peterson's head as he processed the information. He would have seen the name on the wire transfer, the Barrett Foundation. "Ms. Barrett," he finally stammered, his tone shifting from dismissive to deeply respectful. "My apologies. We are incredibly grateful. Stunned, in fact. We were in a terrible position. Your foundation's generosity is simply unprecedented." "I'm happy we could help," Ava said. "The work you do is important. However, my assistance comes with 2 conditions." "Of course." Anything Peterson said eagerly. "First, my identity as the benefactor is to remain strictly confidential until I choose to reveal it. To your staff, to the press, to everyone, the sponsor is a friend of the arts. Is that understood perfectly, Ms. Barrett? We can certainly honor that." Second, Ava continued, taking a slow breath. "I will be attending the gala. I will require 1 seat." At the head table, there was another pause, this one shorter, filled with calculation. "The head table is of course for our main benefactors and honorees," he said carefully. "Mr. Caldwell and his party are seated there." "I'm aware," Ava said, her voice dropping, taking on a new layer of command she rarely used. "You can place me wherever you see fit, Mr. Peterson. But I assure you by the end of the evening you will want me at that table. I will arrive at precisely 8 o'clock. Please leave instructions with your staff at the entrance. My name is Ava Barrett. B-A-R-R-E-T-T. She didn't wait for a reply. She simply ended the call. For the next 2 days, she moved through her life as a ghost. Nathaniel was barely home, caught up in a whirlwind of pre-gala meetings and dinners with Bianca. On the rare occasions he was in the penthouse, he treated Ava with a cloying, patronizing kindness. "You're sure you'll be all right on your own, darling?" he asked on Friday morning, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "I feel terribly guilty." He didn't look guilty. He looked ecstatic like a boy on Christmas morning. "I'll manage, Ava," said, sipping her coffee. She was looking at the stock market ticker on her tablet. One of her biotech firms was up another 7%. "That's my girl," he said, patting her on the head as if she were a golden retriever. Resilient. He had no idea. He saw the placid surface of the lake, completely oblivious to the powerful silent currents moving in the depths below. He was about to learn that still waters run deep, and sometimes they run deep enough to drown a man's ego. On the evening of the Innovators' Gala, a cool autumn rain began to fall, slicking the city streets and making the traffic lights bleed into shimmering pools on the asphalt. Inside the penthouse, The atmosphere was charged with Nathaniel's frantic energy. He was a whirlwind of motion and nervous tension, checking his reflection, adjusting his bow tie, and barking orders into his phone. The car had better be downstairs in precisely 10 minutes, Jean-Pierre. Not 9, not 11. 10. He snapped his phone shut and turned to the living area where Bianca de Santis was waiting. She was the living embodiment of Nathaniel's world, sleek, sharp, and expensive. She wore a severe architectural gown of black silk that seemed designed to repel warmth. Her dark hair was pulled back in a chignon so tight it looked painful, and diamonds glittered like chips of ice at her ears and throat. She held a champagne flute, her posture radiating a smug, predatory grace. "You look nervous, Nate." She purred her lips, barely moving. "Not nervous. Eager," he corrected, straightening his jacket. "Tonight is the culmination of a year's work. Getting a seat on that board. It's the final piece of the puzzle. It's not just about prestige, it's about access. The artists they patronize, the collections they curate. That's where the next generation of our clients are." And Eva Bianca asked, her tone laced with a delicate, dismissive curiosity. She glanced toward the closed door of the studio. What grand plans does she have for her evening of solitude? "Oh, you know," Eva Nathaniel said with an indulgent chuckle. "Probably curled up with a documentary about a melancholic Swedish potter. She's much happier in her own little world." They both shared a small conspiratorial smile. It was the smile of people who believe they are the main characters, and everyone else is just scenery. Meanwhile, behind the studio door, a completely different preparation was underway. Eva was not curled up in sweatpants. She stood before a full-length mirror, her space transformed into a private dressing room. The scent of clay had been replaced by the subtle, expensive fragrance of Baccarat Rouge 540. For weeks this night had been a source of dread. Now it felt like a premiere. Her premiere. She had learned long ago that to be taken seriously in Nathaniel's world, you had to speak their language. And their language was first and foremost visual. It was about power presence and impenetrable confidence. Her dress was not something Nathaniel had bought for her. It was a custom creation from a young avant-garde designer whose career the Barrett Foundation had secretly bankrolled. It was made of a liquid silver fabric that clung to her form like a second skin pooling at her feet. It was both elegant and audacious, a statement of art and power combined. The back was cut daringly low, revealing the strong, graceful lines of her sculptor's shoulders. Her dark hair wasn't in its usual loose bun. It had been styled by a top hairdresser into a cascade of soft, polished waves that fell over one shoulder. Her makeup was flawless, applied by an artist who usually worked on movie sets. It was subtle but transformative, emphasizing the sharp intelligence in her hazel eyes and the resolute set of her jaw. She looked at her reflection, and for the first time in a long time, she recognized the woman staring back. It was not Nathaniel Caldwell's quiet, artistic wife. It was Rosemary Barrett's granddaughter. It was Ava Barrett, the architect of her own fortune. She clasped a simple, elegant diamond necklace around her throat, the only piece of jewelry she wore. It had belonged to her grandmother. A final touch of armor. A notification pinged on her phone. It was her car, a discreet but luxurious black sedan, waiting at a service entrance 3 blocks away. She had planned her logistics with the precision of a military operation. She heard the main door of the penthouse slide open and shut. Nathaniel and Bianca were gone. The apartment fell silent, the only sound the soft drumming of the rain against the vast glass windows. Ava walked out of her studio and into the cold, empty living room. She stood for a moment, looking out at the sprawling, glittering cityscape that Nathaniel considered his kingdom. She felt no anger, no sadness, only a profound and liberating sense of detachment. She was no longer a resident of this gilded cage. Tonight, she was just a visitor passing through on her way to a new life. She picked up a small silver clutch from the console table, slipped her phone inside, and walked to the door. She didn't look back. As she rode the private elevator down, she felt a quiet calm settle over her. She was not nervous. She was not angry. She was ready. Her driver, a professional who had been briefed on the need for discretion, opened the door for her. As she slid into the plush leather seat, she gave him the address. It was the same as Nathaniel's destination, the grand atrium home of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. But while Nathaniel was arriving as a guest, desperate to impress Ava, was arriving as the queen of the castle, returning to see what the courtiers were up to. The grand atrium was a cathedral of culture and wealth. Soaring marble columns held up a glass ceiling, through which the rain-streaked city lights cast a diffused, romantic glow. A string quartet played softly in a corner, their music a tasteful undercurrent to the low hum of conversation from hundreds of the city's most powerful people. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and intricate hors d'oeuvres. Nathaniel Caldwell was in his element. He stood near the center of the room, a glass of champagne in his hand, holding court. Bianca was at his side, a perfect accessory, laughing at the right moments and nodding intelligently as he spoke to a trio of stern-faced bankers. The key is diversification into emerging AI markets, Nathaniel was saying, his voice resonating with self-assurance. Caldwell Capital isn't just following the trend, we're anticipating it. We're 5 years ahead of the curve. He felt a palpable sense of triumph. Every person he wanted to see was here. The air was thick with the scent of money, power, and opportunity. He had successfully curated his evening, his table, his entire public image. Everything was exactly as it should be. The potential awkwardness of having Ava there looking lost and out of place was a crisis expertly averted. He felt a brief pang of something he misidentified as pity for her, alone at home. It was a fleeting thought, quickly replaced by the more pressing need to charm a potential investor. At the grand arched entrance, David Peterson, the foundation's director, stood greeting prominent guests. He was a man perpetually on the edge of anxiety, and tonight was no exception. He kept glancing at his watch, then toward the door. He had received a single cryptic text message 15 minutes earlier from a number he didn't recognize. Ms. Barrett is 5 minutes away. She will be wearing silver. His staff at the door had their instructions. When a woman matching that description arrived alone, they were to discreetly alert him and escort her to a private waiting room, as per her request. Peterson was baffled. He had run a dozen background checks on the Barrett Foundation and Ava Barrett. He'd found a web of holding companies' real estate and a stunningly successful investment portfolio, all managed with extreme privacy. The woman was a ghost, a financial powerhouse operating completely off the public radar. Why the secrecy, and why reveal herself now at their gala? At precisely 8 o'clock, the doors opened again. A woman stepped inside, pausing for a moment to survey the room. A wave of silence rippled out from the entrance. The woman was wearing a gown of liquid silver that seemed to catch and amplify the light. Her dark hair cascaded over one shoulder, and her posture was one of serene, unshakable confidence. She was, in a word, breathtaking. Whispers started immediately. Who is that? I've never seen her before. She must be with the European contingent. Look at that dress. It's a masterpiece. Across the room, Nathaniel's conversation faltered. He heard the shift in the room's energy and turned, slightly annoyed at the interruption. His eyes scanned the crowd and landed on the woman at the entrance. For a moment, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. It was Ava. But it wasn't. It was as if the woman he knew had been replaced by a more radiant, more powerful version of herself. The dress, the hair, the look in her eyes. It was all foreign to him. He stared, his mouth slightly agape, the champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips. Bianca followed his gaze. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a frown of confusion which quickly morphed into a sneer. "My God," she murmured, her voice dripping with disdain. "What is your wife doing here? And what on earth is she wearing? Did she really think she could just crash the party?" Nathaniel's shock curdled into fury. Humiliation washed over him. He had explicitly forbidden this. He had taken her name off the list. The scene he had dreaded, Ava, causing a scene looking out of place, was happening, but in a way he could never have imagined. He imagined the confrontation at the door, the security guards politely but firmly turning her away. The public embarrassment would be catastrophic. "Excuse me," he gritted out to the bankers, his face a mask of controlled rage. "I have to deal with a personal matter." He started moving toward the entrance, a shark cutting through the water. People parted for him, sensing the storm in his eyes. He was rehearsing the speech in his head, the quiet but furious words he would use to escort her out, the promises of a fight to come when they got home. But before he could get to her, David Peterson intercepted her. The director, who had been alerted by his staff, rushed forward, his face wreathed in a smile of pure, unadulterated relief and welcome. "Ms. Barrett Peterson," said his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. He took her hand and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep deference. "Welcome. We are so honored to have you with us tonight." Nathaniel stopped dead in his tracks about 20 feet away. The blood drained from his face. Ms. Barrett. Why had Peterson called her Ms. Barrett? And why was he treating her like she was royalty? Ava smiled graciously at the director. "Thank you for having me, David. It's a magnificent evening." The crowd, which had been watching with rapt attention, began to buzz with a new kind of energy. They had witnessed the director of the entire foundation greet this unknown woman with a level of respect reserved for the highest echelons of their society. Nathaniel stood frozen, a statue of disbelief. Bianca had come up behind him, her own face a canvas of confusion. "What is going on?" she hissed. "Who does she think she is?" At that moment, the string quartet finished their piece. David Peterson led Ava toward the small stage at the front of the atrium. He stepped up to the microphone, tapping it gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please." Peterson's voice boomed through the speakers, silencing the room. "We have a very special announcement. As many of you know, our original title sponsor for this evening's gala had to withdraw at the last minute. We were in a difficult position." He paused for dramatic effect. Every eye in the room was fixed on him and on Ava, who stood serenely by the side of the stage. However, Peterson continued, his voice ringing with genuine emotion. At the 11th hour, a true patron of the arts stepped in. A private benefactor, whose incredible, unprecedented generosity has not only saved this evening, but will fund our youth outreach programs for the next 5 years. Until now, this donor wished to remain anonymous, known to us only as a friend of the arts. Nathaniel felt his heart begin to pound against his ribs. It was a sick, heavy rhythm of impending doom. He couldn't breathe. It wasn't possible. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Peterson beamed, turning and extending his arm toward Ava. "But tonight she has graciously allowed us to thank her in person." Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to introduce you to the sole benefactor of the Barrett Foundation, our primary sponsor for the Innovators Gala. Ms. Ava Barrett. A spotlight hit Ava. The silver dress exploded with light, and as if on a single invisible cue, the entire room, every banker, every artist, every socialite, every titan of industry, rose to their feet in a thundering wave of applause. Everyone stood, except for Nathaniel Caldwell. He remained seated at his now empty table, a forgotten man in a room that had suddenly forgotten he existed. He stared at the woman on the stage, his wife, the artist, the distraction, and saw a stranger, a titan, a queen. And in that blinding, humiliating moment of revelation, his entire world shattered. The applause crashed through the grand atrium like a tidal wave. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a genuine thunderous ovation, a tribute to the mysterious savior of their most cherished event. For the people in that room, philanthropy was a competitive sport, and a move this bold, this significant, and this secretive was the equivalent of a grand slam. Ava stood in the warm glow of the spotlight, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. She absorbed the moment not with arrogance, but with a quiet, centered grace. She met the eyes of strangers in the crowd, nodding slightly, her gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned and admiring faces. Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second over to the Caldwell Capitol table, where Nathaniel sat a solitary figure in a landscape of standing admirers. His face was ashen, his expression a grotesque mixture of shock, fury, and utter bewilderment. Bianca stood beside him, her jaw slack, her carefully constructed mask of superiority utterly demolished. David Peterson offered Ava the microphone. She took it her hand, steady. The applause slowly subsided, replaced by an expectant, electric silence. Every person in the room leaned in desperate to hear from the woman who had appeared out of nowhere and stolen the night. "Thank you, David," she began, her voice, calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. There was no tremor of nerves, none of the hesitancy Nathaniel would have expected. This was a voice accustomed to being heard. "And thank you all for that warm welcome. I'm not much for speeches, so I'll be brief." She paused, letting the silence stretch for a beat. "My grandmother Rosemary Barrett used to say that the best art, the best innovation often comes from the places we overlook. It grows in the quiet corners in the minds of people who are told their ideas are too small, too strange, or too unconventional. It flourishes when it is given a little bit of light and space away from the glare of judgment." Her eyes once again found Nathaniel's. There was no malice in her gaze, only a profound, unshakable truth. The Barrett Foundation was created with that simple principle in mind, to seek out and nurture the potential that others might have dismissed, to invest in the quiet visionaries, the underestimated talents, the brilliant minds working in the garage or the small studio who just need a chance to show the world what they can do. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. In a world of loud, self-aggrandizing charity, this message of quiet empowerment was refreshingly potent. "Tonight is not about me," she continued, her voice resonating with sincerity. "It's about all of you who support this institution. It's about the young artists who will receive scholarships because of your generosity. It's about the new ideas that will be born from the connections made in this room. The Barrett Foundation is simply honored to be a small part of that. Please enjoy your evening." With that, she smiled, nodded to Peterson, and stepped away from the microphone. The applause erupted again, even louder this time. She had been gracious, powerful, and impeccably on message. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't needed to. Her presence was the statement. Her success was the punchline. As she stepped off the stage, she was immediately swarmed. People who an hour ago would have walked past her without a second glance were now desperate for a moment of her time. The mayor was shaking her hand. A famed art critic was singing the praises of her speech. The stern-faced bankers Nathaniel had been trying to impress were now maneuvering through the crowd, trying to get close enough to introduce themselves to her. Ava handled it all with an effortless poise. She was charming, engaging, and just slightly elusive, a combination that the city's elite found utterly irresistible. From his seat, Nathaniel watched the spectacle paralyzed. It was a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. Every handshake she received, every impressed smile directed her way, was a nail in the coffin of his own importance. He had built his identity on being the center of attention, the man with the plan, the one who held all the cards. In the space of 5 minutes, she had taken the entire deck and set it on fire. Bianca finally found her voice. How she whispered, her voice hoarse. How is this possible? Nate the Barrett Foundation. I've never even heard of it. Neither have I. Nathaniel mumbled, his mind racing, trying to piece together a puzzle whose picture he had never even seen. The commissions for her sculptures, her quiet trips to meetings she'd called art consultations, the hours spent on her tablet that he'd assumed were for online shopping. It all coalesced into a horrifying new reality. She hadn't been playing with mud pies. She had been building an empire under his nose, in his home. He watched as David Peterson personally escorted Ava to the head table, the very table he was supposed to dominate. Peterson gestured to the seat of honor right beside his own, the seat that was supposed to have been Nathaniel's. Instead, Peterson's staff was now discreetly adding another place setting at the far end of the table, an afterthought. For him, the ultimate humiliation. Ava took her seat, unfolding her napkin with a steady hand. She was the sun, and the entire solar system of the Gala had just violently realigned around her. Nathaniel Caldwell, who had entered the evening as a star, now found himself a cold, forgotten moon, trapped in the orbit of a woman he never truly knew. He finally understood the meaning of a hostile takeover, and he had just become its primary victim. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze for Nathaniel. He was eventually forced to take his seat at the far end of the head table, a geographical representation of his new status. The conversations around him swirled, but the focus was entirely on the other end, where Ava held court. She spoke about art, about innovation, about market trends in sustainable tech. She was knowledgeable, witty, and captivating. People weren't just being polite to a benefactor. They were genuinely fascinated by her. Nathaniel ate without tasting, drank without feeling, and nodded without hearing. He was a ghost at his own coronation. Every so often, his eyes would meet Ava's from across the long table. There was no anger in her expression, no triumph. There was only a calm, quiet finality. It was the look one gives to a chapter that is well and truly over. Bianca, seated next to him, was utterly silent. Her career was built on aligning herself with power, and she had hitched her wagon to a falling star. She kept glancing at Ava with a mixture of awe and terror, realizing she had bet on the wrong horse in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Her strategic value had evaporated. She was now just the woman who had come with the humiliated husband. When the dinner plates were cleared and the dessert course was served, Nathaniel couldn't take it anymore. He needed to confront her, to demand an explanation, to try and reclaim some shred of control, however illusory. He waited for a moment when Ava was alone, having just finished a conversation with the mayor. He pushed back his chair and walked the long, lonely path to her end of the table. He stood before her looking down. "Ava," he said, his voice a low, strained growl. "We need to talk." She looked up at him, her expression patient, as if addressing a stranger who had lost his way. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Nathaniel." "Don't have anything to talk about?" he hissed, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a furious whisper. "You've made a fool of me all these years. The secret accounts, the investments. You lied to me. In my own house." Ava took a delicate sip of water, her composure unshakable. "I never lied to you, Nate. I simply lived a life you never bothered to see. You created an image of me, a small, helpless artist wife who needed your protection from the big, scary world. You were so committed to that fiction that you never thought to look at the reality. The reality is that you are my wife," he insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Am I?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with steel. "A wife is a partner. A partner has a seat at the table. Your own words, Nate. There wasn't a spot for me. You didn't just exclude me from a party. You erased me from your life because you were ashamed of me. You deemed me unworthy." She placed her napkin on the table and stood up, her silver dress shimmering. She was now at his eye level, and for the first time, he realized she was not the one who was small. He was. His ego, his pride, his carefully constructed world, it was all so fragile, so hollow. "The difference between you and me, Nate," she said, her voice clear and final, "is that my success doesn't require your failure. But your ego, it seems, required my invisibility. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a possession, a beautiful object for your beautiful home that wouldn't distract from the main exhibit you." David Peterson and a few other guests were beginning to approach, drawn by her magnetic presence. She gave Nathaniel one last, lingering look. It was a look of pity. "I will have my things moved out by the end of the week," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours." She then turned her back on him, a simple, devastatingly final gesture. She smiled warmly at the approaching group. "Mr. Mayor, I was just saying how much I admire your new green initiatives for the city." Nathaniel was left standing alone in her wake. He was invisible. The whispers and stares from the surrounding tables were like physical blows. He had tried to block his wife from the list, and in doing so, had blocked himself from his own future. He had wanted to avoid awkwardness at the door, and now his entire life was an awkward scene from which there was no exit. He turned and walked away, not back to his seat, but toward the grand exit. He pushed through the doors and into the cool, rain-washed night. The city lights seemed to mock him, a glittering testament to a world he no longer controlled. He had lost more than a seat on a board. He had lost the one person who had been his anchor, a person whose true strength he had never even bothered to comprehend. Across town in her studio, the sculpture of the bird stood finished. Its powerful wings were fully extended, its head tilted upward, its entire form a perfect, breathtaking expression of imminent flight. The metal bars of the cage lay broken at its feet. It was finally free. Ava left the gala an hour later, not to the cold penthouse she had once called home, but to a suite at the Four Seasons she had booked under her own name. From the window she looked out at the same city, but it looked different now. It was no longer his kingdom. It was a landscape of possibility. Her possibility. The story was finally hers, and she was holding the pen. Ava's story is a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves. It's a testament to the quiet strength that grows in the shadows of underestimation and the incredible power that is unleashed when we finally decide to step into our own light. Her husband tried to write her out of the story, but he forgot one crucial detail: she owned the publishing house. This story is for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or unworthy. It's for the dreamers, the builders, and the quiet visionaries who are forging their own paths away from the spotlight. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone in your life who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. What part of Ava's journey moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening,